Patch 1.5 for Cyberpunk 2077 brought a ton of overhauls and upgrades to the game itself. And although I've been talking about that quite a bit on the channel thus far, what I want to talk about today are the things it added to the game that give us a look at the future of Cyberpunk. As this update also introduced what will likely be some of the next DLCs, at least on a high level, that you can access via certain means. From data mining, we have an idea of what's still being worked on and implemented, and in general, this is kind of a somewhat comprehensive look at what Cyberpunk 2077 is doing next, or at least what we know about what they're doing next from where we sit right now and the information available. One of the first things that they seem to be adding is a Transmog system, something literally requested since the game did release. And if you're not familiar, Transmog lets you replace the appearance of armor or just hide it outright. Sometimes you want to look cool while also having the armor with the best stats on. In Cyberpunk right now, you really have to choose one or the other. Do you want to look cool or do you want to have the best stats, which oftentimes ends up just being a mix mash of various things. But with patch 1.5, CDPR actually started to add a Transmog system. This was discovered, or at least popularized by the modder DJ Kovric, where basically now if you open up the console in-game, type in game.enable transmog, you'll find completely new options around your face gear, and basically giving you the ability to hide your face gear in Cyberpunk. To actually get the console, you have to download a mod. Unfortunately, CDPR removed this in an earlier update, but the mod isn't adding in this functionality. This is just something added into the game where you can toggle things appearing either on your face or on your head overall on or off, where they will just not show up anymore. This applies to photo mode, on vehicles, etc. And even further, this modder DJ Kovric did create a proper mod named Hide Your Gear, which will extend this functionality to all of the gear on your character. So you can hide whatever piece of armor or clothing that you want on your character. So you can run around in your underwear in Cyberpunk while having all of the benefits of the armor you were previously wearing. As of right now, this is just a visual thing, just turning the appearance on or off. There's no functionality around swapping the appearance of this, but it definitely seems like a Transmog system is something they were actively working on around patch 1.5, and I wouldn't be shocked if the next major update, likely patch 1.6, will include this. Or maybe it'll just be a free DLC in the next wave. Honestly, a lot of those free DLCs are fundamentally just kind of features added to the game. Something else that is at least partially implemented are some of the upcoming weapon DLCs. With patch 1.5, we get the first of these, that being the 2 new power weapons that were added, but it seems like they have a lot more planned, and this is one of the most extensive things you could find in the files right now. And in fact, with console commands again, you could actually add these to your inventory and mess around with them, and I'll have a link down below to a post where you could have all of the spawn codes if you want to try it for yourself. But nonetheless, first and foremost, we do have the MA70, a new power light machine gun. This has a really cool design overall, and like most of the weapons, it has a few skins, although not all of these are fully implemented. There's nothing particularly unique about this one. It's really just a new LMG that I think has a cool military but kind of future-esque design overall. Then we have the semi-auto All Awesome, and that is literally the name of this one. It's a new power shotgun, a more compact shotgun overall with a window-esque scope. I'm not sure if this scope's just incomplete, but there's no red dot or reticle of any kind, just kind of a little window at the top of the gun for you to look through. Outside of the scope oddity, to me, overall, it actually just feels pretty similar to the other semi-auto shotguns in this game. Relatively compact again, and doesn't have anything super standoutish about it, outside of its incredibly descriptive name. Then, what is by far the most interesting out of the batch yet, we do have a power precision rifle that has a spawn code of Kolak, but in-game it doesn't actually have a name yet. This is like a heavy sniper rifle. Basically, it almost feels anti-material rifle-esque. All the sniper rifles in Cyberpunk do feel pretty heavy in general. There's none of the kind of lighter tier sniper rifles. I'm definitely using the technical and correct term there, but this one definitely feels like one of the beefiest. And it has the very unique characteristic of being a semi-automatic and not a bolt-action sniper rifle, while still having all of the perks of a sniper rifle. Long range, you could pierce objects, so you could shoot enemies through walls, vehicles, etc. As well as I just love the design of this one. I think it's the most unique, both from a gameplay perspective, in that it's kind of adding in something a bit more unique that stands out compared to the other options already in game, but also visually it just looks kind of cool. I could see a lot of people actually using this, especially for that semi-auto characteristic when this does get added. And continuing the trend of awesome weapons, we have the Senko LX, which is a power SMG with with a really cool design. This one's very clearly not fully implemented, definitely the least implemented out of the batch I've shown you thus far. And even right now it only has this one skin, but it is a particularly cool skin on it. It is super compact, almost machine pistol-esque, and is actually a burst fire SMG, which just feels like a fun mix-up on the weapon overall. It has this interesting aspect to it. So it's the hardest hitting weapon, but it does feel quite unique compared to most of the other SMGs in this category, and you kind of just feel cool whipping this out and taking down a bunch of dudes in Cyberpunk. Then we have the QB, which is also pretty unique in that it is a semi-automatic assault rifle in Cyberpunk. It's also pretty interesting because although it is semi-automatic, it does have a relatively compact design with the extendable stock and the tube shape on the front there. It's a pretty simple and almost familiar AR design overall, but actually using this in combat is pretty unique in that there's not many weapons that occupy this space. Because you do want to keep a medium distance, the rate of fire on this thing is pretty slow, and obviously it's a work in progress, so this is subject to change. You could even see the animations kind of glitch out a bit as you fire it quickly or try to fire it quickly. But then actually taking a slight diversion, then we look at the Kappa Smart Pistol, which is the first non-power weapon that is actually in the files. This is another one, still very work in progress. It's honestly fairly simple overall. It reuses animations from some of the other weapons in this game. It's a single shot pistol that looks fine and is going to lock onto your enemies, but isn't really super unique otherwise. It does have a cool overall aesthetic, but functionally it's pretty simple. Then we actually have a few of the new and upcoming melee weapons. The Kukri, which I'm probably not pronouncing right, which is this really cool chainsaw-like melee weapon. It's another one that is not fully implemented yet, but is the coolest of the melee weapons in what will likely be a melee weapon DLC pack. It has the chainsaw animation when you first take it out. In combat didn't replay, but that might be added later. And right now, at least, it just kind of functions like a regular melee weapon that just looks way cooler. The Tomahawk, which is probably the most boring of the Datamined weapons. This is actually different than the other Tomahawk in the game. This one has a spawn code of Fanged Axe, and it's literally just a new Tomahawk, nothing special about it. Then lastly, this knife, which is yet another new knife, and this one has some kind of charge or device in the center of it, kind of in the handle, but also into the blade itself somewhat. It almost looks like it's based off some of the concept art for Cyberpunk 2077. I love the design of this one. Right now, it's quite strong, but again, obviously subject to change. But yeah, right now, those are all the weapons you could find in the files, and if you are interested, I'll have a link to the spawn codes down below if you want to mess around with some of these yourself. Obviously, some of them are pretty well implemented already and can be quite viable. But overall, this is a pretty interesting scenario in that a bunch of these new weapons are power weapons. As I'm sure many of you remember, a while back, we got this huge list of Datamined DLC names. This list has been pretty much spot on thus far. We have DLC 8 Mirror, which is the mirror customization that was literally just added with patch 1.5, and there's corresponding entries for all of the other DLCs too. But one of the things that was assumed was 4 different weapon packs, that being the SWP for Smart Weapon Pack, then a Power Weapon Pack, which we thought we just got with this update, with those 2 new power weapons, then TWP for Tech Weapon Pack, BWP for Blunt or Blade Weapon Pack, which does seem to follow with those melee weapons we found, and we seemingly got the start of the Smart Weapon Pack also. But now where this gets interesting is we thought all of these packs would have 1 or 2 weapons, but now when you find 7 additional weapons in the files, and a bunch of these being power weapons that seemingly weren't a part of the first power weapon pack, are these weapon packs actually going to be much larger? It almost feels like with the power weapon pack, it's occupying each of the various weapon categories. You have a new LMG, a new sniper, a new assault rifle, actually 2 new assault rifles, but 1 semi-automatic, 2 new SMGs, but one's very small, almost like a machine pistol more. It'd be really awesome if they continued doing this for each of the various weapon classes with both the tech and smart weapon pack, but perhaps that's just asking too much. Maybe they just had a field day creating power weapons, and that's why we have so many. Either way, we're probably getting more weapons in the future. This seems very likely to be some of the next DLCs that are coming. But speaking of that Datamined list of DLCs, what else is there? New Game Plus, which obviously is highly requested. Pretty shocked that they didn't add it in with patch 1.5. It felt like that was a great opportunity, but perhaps they're having issues with implementing it fully. DLC 10 Monster is easily the most ominous. Perhaps it's a new car that seems to be one of the most obvious choices, a new car named Monster. DLC 12 M Finish was suspected to be new melee finishers. We actually got some new melee finishers with this update, but they weren't listed as a DLC. Perhaps this was just kind of implemented as a feature and is not going to be a future DLC anymore. And then we have these 4 new quest entries, and these are also pretty interesting as they're basically just gigs, and they're actually already in the game. You could play them. These are also in various states of completion, but they've actually been in the game since early last last year. There are full gameplay videos online. I'll have a link to these down below. I'm not going to fully show them because this might be a future DLC. I don't want to spoil it. But as far as this questing content, it's still relatively short, like a very simple gig you have in game right now. And of course, that's assuming all of this is true. The datamine's pretty old now, so things might be changing behind the scenes. Although one of the other things that was updated and changed with patch 1.5 is around multiplayer. We haven't heard any official updates on multiplayer since CD Projekt Red said they would stop talking about the future, but within the patch 1.5 files, we could see that some of these strings around multiplayer were updated. There's even several game modes they seem to be testing, but you can't obviously play any of this. From past data mines, we saw some entries around heists that could end up being a thing, but it really just seems like this is all way too early on. What we know is work on multiplayer is progressing. That's the big takeaway here. And even just recently, they had some job listings around it, and we know CDPR is planning to implement multiplayer more gradually. I would be shocked if it's a more iterative process where you get basic multiplayer functionality at first and they expand on that over time. But they also have said that both expansions are coming before multiplayer, so we probably have a pretty long wait considering the expansion may not even come out this year. Speaking of expansions though, there really isn't much to talk about with those, not from the data mines and not from CDPR. There were data mines earlier back around patch 1.2 where there's some entries around the expansions. It seems very likely the expansions will take place around Pacifica and involve the Pacifica fixer Mr. Hands. This may even be reinforced by what we have in game. There's this NPC you can speak to after completing the roller coaster quest in Pacifica that shares some details on the Voodoo Boys potentially disappearing in cyberspace. One Dragon has a phenomenal video looking at this more in depth and how to actually get this NPC to spawn. So it seems very likely that Pacifica is getting more in the future, but as far as when that future is coming, we really have no idea. The area does have a lot of underutilized locations and just huge swaths of inaccessible areas, and the fixer here also didn't get a reward with the recent update like all of the other fixers when you complete all of his gigs, although Mr. Hands only actually has 1 gig. So overall, this is a peek at the near and somewhat further future of Cyberpunk 2077 based off of what we have so far with patch 1.5. The next major thing happening is going to be in mid-April when they have an earnings call, or at least the next major thing we actually know about. We do have this interesting scenario where we don't have any idea or really frame of reference to go off of for the next update. Like obviously they released some hot fixes and stuff like that, and perhaps we get a smaller update in a couple of weeks to a month, but is it going to be another 4 months before the next major update when patch 1.6 drops, or is the time frame smaller now after patch 1.5? We really have no idea. There's been zero communication around this from CDPR, and they'll likely continue this trend of talking about it just before it actually drops because that seems to be working quite well for them. And at the very least, if E3 comes and goes, assuming E3 is even a thing this year, and we see no trailer for an expansion, I would say that all but confirms that the expansion is not coming out in 2022. Otherwise, that's pretty much everything I have to talk about with Cyberpunk. I have a video looking at some of the mods that you can install that will go really well or complement patch 1.5 quite well, so stay tuned for that. Otherwise, as always again, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.